So just to, get everybody situated, we wanted to include the agenda for today in our first slides. So instead of talking it through, hopefully you've had a chance to take a look at it. And then towards the end of the session, what we try to do is have a pull back the curtain moment where we talk through how we structure today's session. So keep in mind, maybe if there's some moments that you found particularly helpful, or maybe those that you felt less engaging, whatever. So if, in case you want to model them in your own class, you have like some sort of framework. Welcome for today, and let me see where I can find my control here. Okay, great. So today is the redesign workshop and it's session 2. And the idea is that it's a guided way to start thinking about a unit in your course and its conversion to the online format. So just to, share a little bit about who registered, and some of you are here, there's some other people who might be joining later. We had in the registration the questions so that we could get a sense of the context that you're teaching in. Registered for this today's session, we have representation from all 3 schools, which is always a nice thing. And as you had probably picked up in the informal chat before our session formally started, we have a range of teaching topics as well as class sizes. Some people are teaching courses with about 20 students versus other folks are teaching up to 110 folks. So there's a good range of different types of classes that are here on today's session. And hopefully you'll be able to pick out some moments of how we're structuring things that make sense for your teaching context. And just to give you a sense of who we are, I am Allison Laird-Samuels. I am the director of the Center for Teaching and Learning. My area is in entrepreneurship. I'm a full-time lecturer there, and I predominantly teach a capstone course in the healthcare MBA program. It's very much assignment driven. We'll talk a little bit more about that. And one of the things that Pamela and I have been doing is trying to think about what's a way to kind of share with you some of our thinking about this topic. And so today, one of the things we had asked you to do in the pre-work is to take a look at the sites Teach OER and Teach Hybrid. And just to like highlight from that, I wanted to point out one of the assignments that I find particularly helpful in the moment and in the context of this today's workshop. It's called Digital Traces, and it's been developed by Jessica Webster Wagner. She teaches she's affiliated with the library. And one of the reasons why I particularly like that assignment is the way she scaffolded it, where there's an OER reading, and then there's some class discussion about it. But then also, I always like to have moments in my teaching where students have an opportunity to not only gain understanding about a concept, but also think about how it relates to the world around them. And the assignment that she has developed has students thinking about digital archives and like who gets to make the decision of what materials should be contained in an archive. So I think that's a pretty powerful lesson that she does in a very much like a learn by doing context that I think is pretty exciting. And then joining me today is Pamela.
So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Pamela Thielman, and I am based at the CTL, and I also teach in the Communication Studies Department. I teach Com 1010, which is the basic course. And you'll hear a little bit more today. My other hat is that I study theater, and so I also teach in that field. So you'll get a little taste of that later. And the thing that I sort of found really fruitful when I came back to the Teach OER stuff, which is actually my primary function at the CTL, is to work on open educational resources. So if you ever have questions, I'm your gal. But is street art, which is an assignment that was put together by Tia Jojima from Art History, or from Fine and Performing Arts, teaching art history. And what I like about it is it creates a really great structure for a simple debate. So in terms of content, she's having students read a little something and then watch a New York Times short feature, like short video about street art. And then students break into small groups, and in each sort of pairing of groups, there's a pro street art. You know, street art is aesthetic, it has value, and then an anti-street art is graffiti, it's garbage. And she gives instructions for using the sort of popular culture materials and their own experience to stage debates in groups. And what I really like about the assignment is how replicable it is. You know, I don't teach art history, but I can easily see providing, you know, a couple of articles or an article and a video, and then having students debate either in my communication course for the purposes of learning how to debate, or as a matter of content, right? Finding a theatrical debate or a design debate, and using this assignment to structure something around that. So I just think it's a really, I like how broadly it applies.
So we wanted to get, before moving ahead, we wanted to kind of check in and see a little bit about where you're at in terms of entering this workshop. So we have a couple people who were not able to join the first session, and then we have some people who are back. And there was pre-work, there was homework. So I'm going to ask you to please participate in this poll. Let's see if I can get my okay, great. So this is a quick little poll that I'm doing, and it's anonymous. So there's no punishment, no judgment, but just knowing about this, getting this information from you will help us to understand where, you know, who we're talking to, what the context is. So if you can take a moment to answer the questions in this informal poll.
Okay, we're 50% there. We can't see who's responding, but we can see how many of you are responding. So that just gives a nice sense of how to time this if you were to deploy a poll like this in your classroom. 5 out of 6.
The submit button for me isn't working. I don't know what I'm not doing correctly.
You're sure you selected all of the, because I know there are the 3 questions. Is it possible one of them isn't?
No, I didn't roll scroll down to 3. Thanks. I just came from the dentist, so if I seem a little out of it, I am. Okay. Were you able to attend last week's workshop? No.
All
So
good.
Thank you for that. I didn't see the 3rd question.
Yeah. In solidarity. I have my dentist appointment tomorrow. Great. So, okay, so I'm going to end the poll and let's see the results. I am sharing the results so everybody can quickly see what's happening. So we can see that some of you were like the A+ students and also had the bandwidth and the time to do this. Others of you did part of, you know, were able to do part of this, and others you weren't able to do it, which is fine, which is totally fine. And then again, there's a nice range of people who do have a rough draft of the unit ready, others of you who don't, and we'll just kind of work around that. And again, split that. Some of you, half of you were able to attend last week, and others of you did not. So this is very helpful information for us to see how we might maybe need to modify some of our plans and as we go forward. And if for those of you who did not attend last week, particularly when it comes a little bit later with the activity, if you need a moment of clarification, don't hesitate to like drop your question into the chat or just to raise your hand, and then we'll circle back to you. Okay, so let's get back to the slide. Just to make sure that everybody's on the same page with a similar sense of vocabulary, we are going to review some of these concepts again. You'll commonly hear us talk about asynchronous versus synchronous teaching and learning. And, you know, synchronous is what we're experiencing now. We're learning in the same space and the same moment. And asynchronous would be for anybody who's watching the video later. It's where people are learning at their own speed, their own time. And just so you know, we will send you later on a copy of these slides. And yes, hopefully you saw in the chat that there's a copy of the worksheets that we'll be using later. So if you want to learn more about any of these topics, you can always click on some of the hyperlinks that we've included in this slide deck. And then the other term that we're going to be using a lot today is scaffolding. And scaffolding is the idea that you are building over time towards this larger unit. It's not like, you know, when you think of a final exam, for example, that you just hand somebody an exam, you know, to take. That would be kind of crazy. I mean, even by assigning readings and offering a moment in class for people to raise questions, that is like a very basic form of scaffolding. So scaffolding is something that we intuitively do, and one of the things that we're, I think, doing today is trying to be a little bit more strategic about it and thoughtful and incremental.
But
now,
yeah.
it's a big question that came up last week, and
yeah, I stepped on your transition there, but yeah, the other kind of big question that came out of our discussions last week, and actually spilled over into other discussions we had at the CTL, which is what is a unit? Like, what do we mean? And so we wanted to really just make explicit that unit is a term we chose because it's fairly non-specific, right? It describes how you organize your course content. So you might define a unit slightly differently than I do, and that would be fine. Maybe you think about units attached to textbook chapters, if that's how your coverage works. Maybe you think about it on themes or X number of weeks. Here again, I've provided two models from my own work. For COM1010, which is speech communication, I went ahead and organized that based on kind of what my higher stakes assessments were. So I took a set of big graded assignments and built up to each of them. So I have a unit on introduction, a unit that I call research, a unit for informative speaking, a unit for persuasive speaking, and a unit in which we cover visual communication. And I've sort of briefly indicated what the assignments that go with each of those are. But I also, in the fall, teach a history of scenic and costume design, and it's in a liberal arts college. It's for these are not design majors. This is looking at design in the larger context of the liberal arts. And so I found that when I broke that down by units, I was really thinking kind of topically, because it's not just a history class. They learn how things are done. They learn all kinds of stuff because I have a lot of freedom in that course. So the first unit is an introduction to what we're talking about. What is scenic design? What is costume design? How are they done? So that takes a few weeks. And then unit 2 is most of the semester. And that is a very selective history, and we talk about in the class why I've selected what I've selected, that goes from the Greeks to the present. But it breaks it out kind of chronologically, but kind of not. And that's many weeks. It's something like 8 of the weeks. I mean, it's a huge chunk. I have a very small unit in which we deal with the question of appropriation in preparation for the final unit, which focuses on their own sort of student-generated design projects. So 2 totally different ways of thinking about units, even within my own work. So Don't be panicked if you're like, why, why does my unit not look like other people's, or what on earth do they still mean by unit? We wanted to really make explicit this time that we chose the word because it is a little bit opaque. It is a little bit empty of meaning, and you can fill it however works for you, thinking through your own organization. The next thing we want to kind of break out is this question of assessment and grading, because before we really jump into what's going on in various units and looking at assignments and how you've done things, we want to just make sure we've made a distinction with these terms, because it's one that we're trying to sort of be mindful of. When we're talking about assessment, we're talking about things that you're doing to improve student learning. So it's that feedback mechanism is how assessment kind of lives in your class. Whereas grading is an evaluation. That's that final formal way of communicating something. So assessments, you can think of them as primarily for you. So these are lower stakes, they're maybe ungraded or complete, incomplete. They tell you how students are doing, how well they understand things, what they're confused about, and they can give you some guidance about which directions you should turn your energies towards in order to get students where you want them to be. Whereas grades are primarily student facing, right? They're between you and the student, they're between the student and the institution. They're measuring success in terms of mastery, and they're also kind of communicating specific forms of achievement. So, Allison?
So, oh, should we do the?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so, sorry, this is a very unprofessional squeaking moment here. I'm having a hard time with my, okay, here we go. So now we have some questions for you. So this is a quick little poll for us. Well, I can't say that I can't continue. So if you guys could take a couple moments to complete this poll.
And we'll use the honor system that you're not flipping back and forth to the slide behind you. We'll consider this.
And that you're not texting each other,
Yeah.
Snapchatting for the answer.
And again, there are 3 questions that you want to answer.
And this is anonymous.
Okay.
Okay.
There we go.
Okay, let's end the polling. Okay, so this is interesting. At the start of your class, you ask students to complete a 10-point multiple choice quiz. So this is this an assessment, or this is a graded assignment? I feel like this is a trick question. To be, I think it's, if it's a 10-point multiple choice quiz and it's 10 points of their final grade, it's probably more of a graded assignment. If it's a quick thing to get them looking at it and it's a very minuscule part of their grade, like it's ultimately, so it's maybe 10 points out of like 1,000 possible over the semester, I view it more of an assessment. I mean, Pamela, what do you?
I tend to think of quizzes as more of an assessment tool, because they tend to, when they get factored into a larger grade, they tend to scale down to a very, very small number of the percentage of the overall.
Yeah,
but
so
I agree. This is kind of a trick.
Yeah, this is
I'll give it that.
Question. Yeah, so it's kind of like, what is your attitude towards grades and the overall schematic? But very often quizzes are a quick way for you to assess like what's going on. Sometimes, particularly in a larger size class, you might need to assign some points to it so people do it. Okay, in terms of number two, everybody said that this is an assessment, and very much that's the case. It is an assessment because it's more of a self-reflective moment to get a sense of where the class is. Okay, and then lastly too, this is an assessment with question number three. I get a kick out of these meta moments because this is a quick way for us to figure out what is the point that there might be a point of confusion. And it's really with question one because that is a confusing moment. So I think everything makes a lot of sense from my assessment perspective. How about you, Pamela?
I feel like we are on target and ready to move forward.
Okay. I think, do I need to stop? Oh, no. Okay, I closed it. Great. Okay, so moving forward.
Just quickly, so there are different types of assessments. They're low stakes. They're things like discussion boards, ungraded or practice quizzes, reflective writing, assigning student leaders for course discussion, so giving students an opportunity to articulate. But what we, and this is in the worksheet, the redesign Unit 1 document that is at the top of the chat. There are some questions you can ask yourself if you're trying to sort of build out your own effective assessments in terms of, you know, what goes on that quiz or what is the discussion board prompt I'm looking for. So things like what do I want students to learn and what do I want them to do? Why do I want them to do that? What is the purpose of my feedback and how can I clearly express my intentions to students? So thinking both about what the students are doing and then what you're going to do. The feedback question is really about, you know, do I need to grade on a point scale or can I just say complete or incomplete? You know, the check plus, check minus is a terminology a lot of people use, but thinking about not only how much or what you're going to assess, but how that figures into your own workload as you plan that for the semester.
Yeah. So as we transition to the next slide, this is a moment for you to start working a little bit on your context, teaching context. So I'm going to put you into some breakout rooms, and basically during this breakout room, I'd like you to be able to share with the other person or people in your breakout room, how did you conceive of a unit in your course? And you know, some of us, particularly from the previous workshop, one way to go about this is to really focus on what is a course learning goal and then to develop a unit specific to that. Others of you might have a different approach. Like for example, when Pamela was talking about her course that is more assignment based, in which there might be several learning goals that are wrapped up in a unit. Is there a major topic students should understand or a skill that they should develop? Anything else? So again, this is an opportunity for you to, in the breakout room, just quickly share what your thinking and approach has been. And if you're just really starting to think about this today, it's, you know, it's fine to say what you think your initial thoughts might be. Welcome back. So hopefully from that you started to be able to articulate to somebody else your thoughts about what a unit is for your course.
So we talked about backwards design, or backward, I always want to say backwards. And we went over it last time. So if you weren't able to make it, we'll have the video available, but just to get the terminology on the table for us all today, it's a process for course design or instructional design that starts with this kind of 3-question format of what are the learning goals for my course? How will I know if my students have achieved these learning goals? So it's you know, what are those points they have to hit, and then what lessons, assignments, readings, activities, etc. do I need to provide students for them to achieve these learning goals? So I like to kind of shrink it all the way down to learning goals lead to assessments, lead to lesson plans. So that's just there to get our heads in the same space on backward design. So we're going to use that backward design mindset and take a few moments to do some solo reflection. And I'm going to say that if you were with us last time and you have your rough draft, you can sort of straightforward, in a straightforward fashion, follow these instructions. So you're going to choose a higher stakes assignment. So what is one of those bigger assignments, an exam, an essay, a presentation, and identify for yourself. And if you look back to the, I can actually, Allison, are you able to drop the document in the chat one more time, just
Yeah.
while I'm talking here? So this is in the document as the Word doc that's about to be dropped into the chat as a worksheet that you can fill out, or you can write it by hand, however, but just identify what is that assignment, what are is the learning goal, or what are the learning goals? How are you going to provide, that should have a content in there. How are you going to provide content for students? Or what are you going to provide content for students there? Now I'm misreading. So glad this is the recorded version that's going on the internet forever. What are you going to provide for students? What are they going to do for lower stakes practice? Have you included moments of learning as a classroom community? Now, this is not a requirement, but we're just asking you to think about it in case that's something that you need, because students may feel that they need it. And then finally, what are your priorities when it comes to grading? And again, we're asking you to think about ways that you are going to manage your own workload, because this is asking yourself questions like, well, will you have a rubric? Well, I don't have one, but maybe that would make it easier. What would be in it? Or, hey, is this something where you don't need to mark the grammar errors? That's not the point of the assignment, right? So take, I believe we said 2 or 3
5
minutes?
minutes?
Oh, 5 minutes.
I think we have 5 minutes.
Okay, well then let's take 5 minutes and see what you can answer here. If you were not with us last time, I would suggest that you choose an assignment, one that you're familiar with and sort of would be easy for you to work with in this context, and choose something you know will be in the course that you feel is an important assignment, and start going through these steps for that assignment. What is?
Okay, so I'm gonna ask folks to rejoin as we transition on to the next activity. So now that you've had a chance to think a little bit more deeply about your plans, we're going to jump into a group activity. So you've basically just reviewed or started to create a rough draft of a scaffolded high stakes assignment. And now it's time to share it and get some feedback. So in a short moments, we're going to put you into breakout rooms again. And this is the scope of the activity, pointing again to the conversation earlier about how can you make the instructions as clear as possible. They're here on this slide. So once you break out into the group, ideally there'll be 3 people in a group. Take the first couple of seconds to just figure out who's going to be first, like an A, B, C. I think we're all familiar with that in our classes. And then choose who. It's helpful if there's one person who's willing to take notes, but that's, I guess, optional. But it is helpful to have somebody who's keeping time. I'll try to keep track of that in and broadcast out the messages as well. But the very important thing is to choose who's going to be the first person to present. So the person, and in a moment, I'm going to show you the feedback prompts. So take a moment, make sure that everybody's read the feedback prompts to kind of get a sense of what you're listening for. First presenter will have 2 minutes. Really try to keep it to 2. What are your plans for scaffolding your high stakes assignment? You might find it helpful to refer to the work that you just did in the scaffolding worksheet. The other members of the group should be actively listening to the 2-minute kind of pitch about this scaffolded assignment. And then for 5 minutes, the people who have been listening, it's going to be their turn to give some informal feedback to kind of help you, structure that feedback, or to focus it. You can draw upon the feedback prompts that I'm going to show in a moment. And then after that, switch roles. So the idea that there's 7 minutes focused on each person in the group. And really try to make sure to keep to the time so that that third person doesn't wind up only having 2 minutes, because we've all been in situations like that. The purpose of this activity, just to give you a big picture, is that we found that it's helpful to start articulating your ideas to somebody else. It kind of forces you to start really gelling and committing to certain concepts, at least initially. This is also an opportunity for you to receive and offer informal feedback on your work so far. Given the fact that you're getting feedback from some of your peers, you might get some new ideas on how you might broaden your sense of what you might be able to achieve with this unit. There might be some ideas from a different discipline that may be relevant, that are new to you, that you might want to consider. And then also from this activity, we're hoping that with the, again, being cognizant that it can take so much work to develop these courses, is how to prioritize your time and energy. So what are the things that seem to be clear that you have good, you have pretty solid, and what are the points that maybe need to flesh out a little bit more? So I'm going to go on to show you the feedback prompts, and then after that, we will start divvying people up into rooms. So again, the purpose of the feedback is really to help you to identify areas that you need to expand upon in your high stakes assignment, so you can make it as clear and accessible as possible. And again, helping you to prioritize how to spend your time and energy. So one of the feedback prompts, I would suggest not trying to cover everything, but maybe focus on 1 or 2 when you're giving feedback to somebody else. And Pamela's also dropped into the chat these feedback prompts so that you can refer to them when you're in your breakout room. But one thing is, like, do you have the ability to, as somebody who's listening to this unit, do you have a clear sense about how the graded assignment aligns with the learning goals, the informal assessments, and all these course activities? Does the narrative seem to make sense? The second prompt for you to think about, how robustly is the assignment scaffolded? Are there enough low stakes assignments or assessments that could be added? The third, is there a place to build in some more communal learning? The fourth, is there a way for students to engage asynchronously if needed? So for example, say somebody's having an issue with their Wi-Fi that day. Is there a way for you to get them caught up, or that they can still engage in the class so they don't miss out on something? And this can be hard, can be challenging for a lot of people to think through, but that's something to be aware of. And then also, this is really important. Does the workload feel balanced? Not only for your students, but also for you. I mean, sometimes Pamela and I hear people's ideas that are really, really exciting, but we're like, wow, that sounds like a lot of work. Maybe it makes sense to start off a little bit like low, with something a little bit more scaled back for the first time, and then maybe try that out, and then take it from there, instead of going full like 150% on something. And then lastly, a prompt to consider is, does the assignment or its component or parts feel relevant to the students in their lives, their academic goals, whatever is appropriate? So for example, the assignment that I pointed out that I particularly admire from Teach OER, I think that particular assignment does a great job of including a reflective moment for students to think about, why does this question matter? And to me, as a person in this world where digital archives are increasingly important. And also, does the assignment, is there a moment, maybe perhaps based upon your discipline, on your teaching, that you'd say like, hey, I know this really interesting thing that you might be able to add to this assignment. So these are all prompts for you to consider when you're listening. to help you structure the feedback. So I'm going to stop talking, and now I am going to put you into some breakout rooms. So welcome back. We are, Pamela and I really tried to be like firm about fixing our like coming up with a schedule, and we're behind. And part of that is in the last group that I joined, loved some of the ideas, got sidetracked with that, but now we're back. So Pamela.
I'm on mute. Now I'm unmuted. So we're only a minute behind, but we're going to take this opportunity to bring everybody back into the room and ask, just some general feedback questions about how this went for you. What did you learn? What were your takeaways? We're not looking necessarily for anything extremely specific, because, if you're, Allison probably heard similarly, or Allison's experience probably similar to other folks in the room, where you probably heard some fun stuff from other people. So feel free to jump in, or we will ask some folks to share with us, modeling that particular behavior for the classroom. But would anybody like to jump in and just share something briefly about how this this conversation or this activity went for them? Let's go on to the homework before we run out of time here. So we would like to ask you next time to take your rough draft and turn it into something with a bit more polish. So this would be kind of, something between this is what, this is my beautiful finished go time syllabus draft and your rough draft. So we'll call this a first draft. And again, because your unit is not going to look necessarily like anybody else's unit, we don't want to be too prescriptive about what this looks like. It may be a drafted section of the syllabus. It may just be that tasks worksheet fleshed out in a way that makes sense to you. It may be a sort of collection of documents linked together in some way. And it might include a timeline or schedule. So it might be the first part or some part of your schedule of classes. It might include course content that you're going to use, links to videos, readings, at least the names of things or ideas. You could have student-facing materials starting to take shape, things like instructions or descriptions of assignments, or anything kind of task-based or activity-based that you might want to write out for them. You might provide, sample documents. So any of the things that go into that first unit, those are the things that we're asking that you bring a polished rough draft for next week. And so we asked you to look at the Teach OER and Teach Hybrid video and to just poke around on those sites a bit before coming. And we've sort of mentioned throughout little bits and pieces relating to it, but we want to remind you that if you find yourself in need of help figuring out a blogging assignment, or you need to see, I want to do some close reading, or I want to try this, I want to try that. Teach OER and Teach Hybrid are intended to be sort of archives or repositories of materials made by other folks at Baruch that are shareable. You can take them whole cloth, you can take them and modify them, you can use them as models, you can use them as inspiration. So we encourage you to, anytime you say to yourself, oh, I have to reinvent the wheel, I need to do this amazing thing. Yes, go ahead and do an amazing thing, but maybe see if somebody has provided some groundwork or some structure that you could build on, so that you are not taking on such tremendous labor specific, specifically or especially if you are teaching more than one class that you have to revise for the fall. I'm just doing 2 and it is a lot of energy. So
Yeah, and I'm just building on that. I find it always takes a lot of time for me to write out like forward facing instructions to students, like step 1, read this blog post, step 2, do this, so again, looking at these assignments, you could literally copy paste and then revise what's already there and adjust the language instead of having to come up with original poetic student-facing instructions. So again, try to be mindful of the labor that this takes.
and I encourage you, if there's something specific that you're looking for, like, are there instructions for how students can access Zoom, or has somebody done instructions for annotating a document on Google Drive? Reach out to me by email, and I'm sure for a lot of the things that you might want to do, there will be things that we can point you to that if they're not exactly what you're looking for, they can provide some useful models.
Yeah, exactly. Great. So again, we hope that you will do the homework and join us next week. And we plan to spend, I think, most of the next week's workshop really workshopping your draft. We only didn't really have enough time to go into depth into your plans for the unit, but next session, the idea is that you are going to, have some more guided feedback that you're giving other people, and also that you'll receive on your own work. So stay tuned also for some instructions on how you might be asked to share your work. I think we're still trying to sort out the details of that, if it makes sense for there to be a Dropbox or someplace like that, or you email us for materials in advance so that we can readily, you'll be in a better position to more quickly share your work. So again, in the spirit of quickly trying to pull back the curtain, and then I know I can stay on a little bit afterwards to answer any specific questions, that when we were designing this session, this is what we were doing in terms of our planning. One is that we again try to include some icebreakers, some sense of community. So that's one of the reasons why we did the registration poll, but also shared our food for thought on assignments that both Pamela and I found of interest on Teach OER and Teach Hybrid. One of the big concerns faculty have is, how do I take attendance, measure participation for an online class, particularly if people don't have their web cameras on. So we tried to model that. For example, there's the polling, there was the quiz. We then had you go out in breakout rooms. If nobody was participating, it was clear that they weren't really there. So we were trying to model different ways that aren't simply relying on the web camera, that you can, assess whether or not somebody's engaged in the class. We tried to, as many of us have faced when you're teaching a class, not everybody has attended the last session or done all their homework. So what are ways you can kind of, balance getting everybody up to speed, but hopefully not boring the people who've already been present in the previous work. Also, we've been trying to really be cognizant that there's been a lot of work that's been asked of faculty in the redesign of their courses. So we're constantly trying to, indicate ways in which you might cut down on some of your workload and make it more manageable. And then we discussed the difference between assessment and grading, and hopefully modeled what assessment can look like by using the Zoom poll. Lastly, we spent a lot of time today asking you to think about how you might scaffold your assignment. And we definitely spent a lot of time thinking about how we would scaffold today's workshop. You had the asynchronous pre-work. Then we had a little bit of content review. We had some moments of informal reflection. So again, easing people into the content in a low stakes way. We tried to offer sharing and peer feedback to show how there can be communal moments of learning. as well as some group discussion activities. So really trying to toggle between us kind of doing some more presentational, us leading the conversation, but also giving moments for you to engage with learning and giving feedback to each other. We do have homework for the next session, so you see a method of describing that and having it be asynchronous work. And then today we have, which is happening now, the pull back the curtain moment, and then we will wrap up today with some Q&A. Again, trying to, I think with the way the Q&A is structured today, by leaving it towards the end, we're trying to really balance how do we manage recording the session so that people can join asynchronous later on versus hopefully really protecting your confidentiality and privacy by leaving the questions towards the end. And I believe that is it, except
Yeah,
for
except for the questions. Is that correct?
yeah, and
So,
also just so you know too, before leading to
oh,
questions.
yeah, we said stay connected, but if you need a refresher, here are the ways. You can visit the CTL site. There is right now a very cool thing. It's the Ask Me Anything forum. It's staffed on a daily basis. So it's something that we're experimenting with. And so feel free to throw a question out there. If the person who's on doesn't know, they will reach out to someone who does. And finally, you can email Allison or myself. You can find us. These are, going to be shared with you, or you can just look for us in the Baruch contacts.